Imagine this. A nation is about to be born. Centuries of foreign rule are finally ending, and you're faced with this almost impossible task: write one single rulebook to unite an entire subcontinent. Well, this is the story of how that rulebook, the Constitution of India, was made. I mean, really think about that for a second. Where do you even start? How do you design one system of government for a population that huge, with hundreds of languages, all these different faiths, and all while you're just stepping out of the shadow of colonial rule? That was the incredible challenge facing India's founders.
But here's the thing. They weren't starting with a totally blank page. The first drafts, if you can call them that, weren't even written for a nation. They were written for a company.
Yeah, it all started with trade. The East India Company showed up just to do business. But by the mid-1700s, they weren't just traders anymore. They were basically running the show in major provinces, collecting taxes, handling civil justice. They'd become a political power. And things got so out of hand that the British government finally had to step in with the Regulating Act of 1773. That was the very first attempt to get a handle on the company's massive power in India.
Everything really changed after the huge revolt of 1857. That's when the British Crown just took over completely. So you see this clear split. The era of company rule ends and Crown rule begins. The goal wasn't just about making a profit anymore. It was about direct imperial administration. The whole game had changed.
Okay, so that brings us to the next chapter, the era of Crown rule. And this is where we start to see the first tiny steps toward including Indians in the administration of their own country, usually because the pressure was really building.
This timeline really shows that slow, kind of reluctant evolution. The 1861 Act was a big deal. For the first time, Indians were brought into the lawmaking process. Then you have the Acts of 1909 and 1919, which brought more changes, but also some really deep divisions. And finally, that huge 1935 Act. It was this incredibly detailed document that actually became a blueprint for a lot of India's final constitution. But its main idea, a federation of all the provinces and princely states, well, it never actually happened because the princely states just weren't on board.
So what on earth was this diarchy thing we just mentioned? Well, think of it like this. It was basically a compromise. The British said, okay, we'll give Indian ministers control over some subjects. That was the transferred list. But the real power, things like the police and finance, that stayed in the reserved list, controlled by the British governor. It was this experiment in double rule that, let's just say, didn't really work out. Now, this is a really critical turning point. The Morley-Minto reforms of 1909 totally changed the political game in India. It created a system where Muslim members could only be elected by Muslim voters. This officially, as the source material puts it, legalized communalism. And later on, this same idea was expanded to include Sikhs, Christians, and others, creating political divisions that would have massive consequences down the line. So, all these British-led reforms were happening, but they just weren't cutting it. The whole story was about to change in a big way. Indians didn't just want a seat at a table someone else had built. They demanded the right to design the house themselves. They demanded the pen. And the idea didn't come from a big political party at first. It came from one person, M.N. Roy, a pioneer of the communist movement in India. Back in 1934, he was the first to officially say, hey, Indians should create their own Constituent Assembly to write their own constitution. And in just 4 years, boom, that idea becomes a national mission. Jawaharlal Nehru, speaking for the Indian National Congress, made this powerful statement. And notice the key words: no outside interference, and an assembly elected by adult franchise, meaning every single adult gets a vote. This wasn't just a wish anymore. It was a core goal of the entire independence movement. So, after years of struggle, after World War II, the demand was finally met. The stage was set for what would become one of the greatest political and intellectual projects in modern history, the Indian Constituent Assembly. So who was actually at this drafting table? Well, the assembly that formed in 1946, it was this fascinating mix. It wasn't directly elected by every single person, but its members were chosen by provincial assemblies. And what's really important is that it was designed to represent all of India. There were seats for Hindu, Muslim, Sikh, Parsi, and Christian communities, as well as for women and the scheduled castes and tribes. The whole of India was in that room. So what was their North Star? What was the big idea guiding them? Pretty early on, Nehru introduced something called the Objectives Resolution, and it basically became the mission statement for the whole project. The goal wasn't just to set up a government, It was to build a nation on the bedrock principles of justice, equality, and freedom for every single citizen. Now, you can't tackle a job this massive without breaking it down, right? So the assembly had a bunch of committees. And just look at the names who were in charge of the most important ones. You've got Nehru handling federal powers, Sardar Patel on the provincial side, Dr. Rajendra Prasad steering the whole ship, and of course the incredibly important drafting committee led by Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. All right, so with the dream team and the mission statement in place, it was time to get to work. The actual nitty-gritty work of drafting. And the sheer scale of this effort, it's just hard to wrap your head around. Now, this is the part I find absolutely incredible. This wasn't some secret meeting happening behind closed doors. After the first draft was published, they released it to the public. For 8 whole months, the people of India could read it, debate it, criticize it, and suggest changes. That's a profoundly democratic move, and it led to a second draft before the assembly even began its intense line-by-line review. And the people in that room, they didn't just make things up. They did their homework, a lot of it. They studied the constitutions of about 60 different countries from all over the world to find the best possible ideas for India. The entire process took place over 11 marathon sessions. We're talking nearly 3 full years of intense debate and deliberation. And if you want a sense of just how deep those deliberations went, get this, a staggering 7,653 amendments were suggested. And of those, nearly 2,500, 2,473 to be exact, were actually debated in detail in the assembly. Every single word was put under the microscope. And right at the center of this whole process, you have Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. As the chairman of the drafting committee, he is rightly called the chief architect of the Constitution. He was known for his logical, forceful, and really persuasive arguments, and he masterfully guided the draft through that sea of debates and amendments to get it to its final form. And this is the culmination of that entire journey. It started with rules for a trading company, went through decades of colonial reforms, then a powerful demand to write their own story, and finally, years of painstaking debate. The final document was more than just a law book. It was the blueprint for a sovereign, socialist, secular, and democratic republic. After that monumental effort, the Constitution was adopted on November 26, 1949, and it came into full force on January 26, 1950. But that leaves us with one last big question to think about. For a document that was created in the world of the 1940s, what is its single biggest challenge in the incredibly complex and fast-changing world we live in today?